Did I make you sad again that I was breaking your God's laws? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that was just for you, dear sister.
Oh, thank you.
A little midday booby shake.
Bring on that can of worms, Nancy.
The pictures of me recording where I'm like, we came to this planet looking for intelligent life. Oops, we made a mistake. Rest in peace, Robin Williams.
Welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patty, and I make this podcast with my sister Nancy. We grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. We're also nerdy about history and culture, but we're critical of religion. So get ready to get mad or to nod your head in agreement as we embark on today's topic. Today's conversation marks our final episode, at least for now, of our series on bodily autonomy. Nancy and I thought what a better way to wrap it up than to dive into a topic that is personal, cultural, and controversial. And that's the topic of body modification. We'll be peeling back the layers of how our old cult, the Worldwide Church of God, demonized piercings and tattoos, body modifications in general. We'll discuss what it meant for us and people we knew, get into Scripture, and how the Scripture is used to argue for and against body modification, sometimes even the same Scripture. Plus, we're going global to explore the fascinating ways that humans have used body modification to signal belonging, power, or rebellion. Join us for this lively, irreverent, and very human conversation. And if you haven't heard, Nancy and I now have a Patreon. If you like what Nancy and I do here at the Apostate Sisters, head on over to Patreon where you can become one of our sinful siblings. Help support the show. And if you need some more Apostate Sisters, look for us on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Blue Sky. See you there.
Hey, Pats. So, is this our final episode on bodily autonomy?
Well, no. I mean, not really.
No.
For now. How about let's say for now?
Okay.
There's no way talking about what we talk about with the leftover traumas that people are carrying from their high control environments. I don't think there's any way we're ever going to truly leave behind the topic of bodily autonomy. In fact, we just had an interview with our friend Ember from Better Than Ember and the Transposition Show, and she was talking with us about how when she looks at conspiracy theories and pseudoscience and things like that, what she identifies is that the goal of those conspiracy theories existing in the world is ultimately to take our bodily autonomy, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so I mean, this is maybe the biggest topic we could bring up. It's the antithesis to the high control environments that we were a part of, because
Hmm.
everything about that sought to take our bodily autonomy, and we are now seeking to restore that for ourselves and for people who are listening and joining our various groups.
And in a way, bodily autonomy is sort of like a defining topic for our channel. I think it's very important that we talk about this. And you're right, there's absolutely no limit to how many smaller topics are within bodily autonomy. I mean, look, you and I were going through all these different aspects of bodily autonomy. Well, what can we talk about next? Fasting, circumcision, and then here we're landing on things like, well, tattoos, and should you pierce the ears of your child, when they can't give consent. I mean, they may seem like minor things, but I think it's important that we talk about. And we can go all the way up to like eunuchs, people that had their body parts removed without their consent. I mean, we already talked about circumcision, but
I think you're getting us to the right point to start at, which is how are we defining body modification, at least for
right.
the purpose
Mhm.
of this episode, right? So, I mean, tattoos and piercings, I think, are the most common and the ones that, kind of everyone will have an opinion about. It was like, every parent will be like, "Oh, horrified if their child does one of those," in some of the conservative circles we'd run in,
Yes.
especially tattoos. Like, ooh, that really it really gets people riled,
Hmm.
even just those, no matter if they're happening in an extreme way or in a way that is like really common. So,
Yeah.
but I think it goes beyond that though, right? It goes beyond just the tattoos and the piercings, um, because it's like there's sort of a layer of there's acceptable body modifications, and who you are depends on what is acceptable, right, to the culture at large, or to like a fundamentalist Christian, like what's acceptable is going to be different, right? Like ears being pierced versus nose being pierced versus navel being pierced versus eyebrow versus, like
Hmm.
versus clit. Like people have opinions depending on where and how big it is and all of that stuff, you know?
Well, I remember in the Worldwide Church of God where we were raised, tattoos was an absolute no-go. Like you didn't dare. And I don't know if it was going back to that passage in the Bible that tells you not to get a tattoo or to brand yourself, not to mark yourself.
I think my takeaway here is the recognition that we're not just talking about tattoos and piercings, that there's a whole lot more we could throw under this umbrella of body modification, right? I mean, I think we could be looking at things like plastic surgery, like getting your tongue split, getting, like you said, branding, or getting, what is it, scarification, I believe they call it. There's various methods of like intentionally creating scar patterns on the skin. People will tattoo their eyeballs. People will get holes drilled in teeth. Like that's been a thing throughout history too. Like we have to recognize that there's a layer of this where people are choosing these body modifications for themselves
Mhm.
as a way to like individuate, like plastic surgery or hair dye or so but even that it gets a little weird of like, are they doing it because they are being an individual and wanting this for themselves? Or like, I would bring up in the case of plastic surgery, do they really want it for themselves? Or is that like also a version of I'm trying to be acceptable within my group?
Right.
We wouldn't call culture at large a high control group, but like, you can kind of see how there's a little bit of like, hey, you need to look this way to fit in, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Um,
How many young girls out there get breast implants? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. People want to get it, but how many young people out there get breast implants simply because they feel like society is pushing them to look a certain way or for them to get attention, or maybe you want to make it big in Hollywood, but you need a bigger chest to do so. Whatever the fuck reason.
Right. It's like if we see the coercion as the problem with body modifications, would you say, like, if there's not coercion involved and a person is choosing to do something to their own body, change something for themselves, and they're an adult and they've chosen it, they're handling it, whatever, do you think that's always okay?
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything a person, an adult, should not be allowed to modify about themselves?
That's a very good question. Oh
I
my
know.
God. Like you said, like there's no bars there. People can tattoo their fucking eyeballs if they want to.
There are reasons why people decide that's for them
Yeah.
that are valid to them. And so like, if we're gonna allow each other to have autonomy, I feel like that's the thing that we gotta accommodate in a way.
Right.
But yeah,
It's
you're right. It's like if someone who has decided to tattoo themselves from head to toe, if there if there were a way to say, "Hey friend, you're struggling with whatever and we can identify that," and the tattoos were like a self-coping mechanism out of it. Well, the tattoos still aren't really the thing we need to address, like how they're feeling that like drove them to do something they wouldn't have otherwise done. Well, that's what we need to address, right? Like in to me, I don't see unless there's like in something injurious or like causing them to not have functionality. Boy, all of this is so nuanced. It's kind of like, yeah, they're an adult. They get to do what they want with their body. It's the only thing we come into the world with. It is ours.
Well, and that's the thing too, when they get to be an adult, it's kind of like, well, what age do we allow maybe our children to get their ears pierced or
Ooh, good
anything else
one.
pierced for that reason? Like, I don't think people should be going and piercing the ears of babies necessarily. They can't give that kind of consent. It may seem like something really minor, but that is their body. We don't want to make any alterations to it without their consent. And it's kind of like, well, I guess it depends. I mean, I think someone getting their ears pierced, maybe 14, 15, 16 is kind of like that age bracket where a lot of people say, yeah, you can go ahead and get your ears pierced. I didn't get mine pierced till I was actually in my 30s for some weird reason. Maybe.
Oh, now, okay. So the ear piercing thing, I think is very interesting. Like, this is where it gets murky when you're walking that line of, staunch bodily autonomy in the context of cultural things that exist, because there are some Hispanic cultures, Hispanic groups that
Mhm.
it's very cultural, very traditional to pierce the ears, I think, especially of little girls in their culture. And so
For sure.
like,
India too.
sure.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like we certainly aren't the people to be like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. Like just upend your culture. That gets really murky. But at the same time, I could always say I would stand up for the rights of an individual child to have the
Right.
rights to their own body. So we aren't the people to solve that conundrum, I suppose, other than to have this conversation and raise the level of how we're talking about this and how much we think about bodily autonomy in every other kind of topic we engage with, because it's in there, right? If we fundamentally are all like vying for power to survive this life, like bodily autonomy is just going to play into so many of our interactions with each other. Yeah.
Yes.
But
Wow.
yeah, when it comes to ear piercing, I think my kiddos were 3 and 5, 4 and 6, something like that, when they both decided that was for them and they
Yeah.
wanted it. And like, uh, to me, I guess as their parent, I thought this part is so readily, like you said, done for infants without their consent. And it's, you know, uh, there's not like stuff you're going to damage in an earlobe
Yeah.
exactly. So it was like, well, they want it, that's fine. And they chose it now, and they'll have that experience of having said, I want this body modification thing done, and then it getting done, right? They knew they chose it, and they did it, right? And so to
Right.
me, that was a really valuable experience to have it go that way. Um, it was kind of cool when we went to the piercer all those years ago. It was a little place in town here where he has a like a piercing museum, kind of a little tiny collection,
Interesting.
yeah, of various groups from around the world, just like information and photographs of some of the traditional piercings that had been done in some of these like tribal groups, especially. So it was a
Mhm.
pretty cool experience for the kids to get to see something about how piercing exists in the world while choosing to do a piercing on themselves.
I realize ear piercing is maybe it comes off as not a big a deal as something like, oh, tattooing your child without their consent or something. I don't know. Sometimes there's these cultures around the world where you just tattoo people regardless of whatever age, and then you do like gauge earrings and such for there's all kinds of beauty standards around the world. Obviously, we feel like consent should be a part of that.
Culture is what makes things acceptable or not as far as piercings
Mhm.
and stuff. Like maybe
Right.
we could go outside of culture and say, well, hey, if it has to do with actual like health and wellness of that body post piercing, maybe that goes outside of culture. We could hope it does, but really, like, what people think is acceptable and not varies widely based on just what has been normalized in the context they live in.
Right.
Like you mentioned gauged ears, and people are on both sides of that. There obviously are people around us that do that from
Mhm.
small to very large, where the earlobe's very stretched out. Um, and there are, some of the Karens would probably be like, why would you do that? La, 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 and have a big problem with it. But it's true that when that choice is made, it's kind of irreversible. I knew someone a few years ago who had had like a fairly large gauge in their ears and decided they were done with that phase of their life. And so they had to have a surgery to put their earlobe back together and, shape it into something more like what they had started with, right?
Yeah.
So, but these are choices we make. And I don't think they were mad about it. They were just like, well, okay, I did that. Now I'm done. Now we'll put it back together and I'll move on with my life, you know?
Right. Yeah. I think the main thing is, it always goes back to consent and whether, hey, if you are an adult, I know piercings goes a little bit earlier, but yeah, if you're consenting adult, what difference does it make what you do to your body, As long as you weren't coerced into it. I remember somebody in your world, Pats, where you had, I want to say, like an earring in your nose, and it like, didn't you have like a chain or something going over here, or no? It was,
No, no, no,
oh,
no.
okay, I remember the story now. Okay, you had an earring, or you had a nose ring at one point, and I remember some evangelical Karen in your world saying something really snooty to you. Well, what are you gonna do next, dear? Hang a chain from your belly button?
She was being snarky and convinced that I was going to put a chain from my nose piercing to my ear piercing. And she said it like it was just this horrible, disgusting, heathenist thing to do if I would choose to do that. And I was kind of like, so that's a traditional wedding piercing in India.
Yep.
And you're treating it like incredibly rudely, like it's some disgusting, gross thing to do
But
if I
that's how
were to
she
do
looks at those people in India and other places that do that. She looks down
well,
upon them as the heathenistic people.
but that also is indicative of like not thinking that it was like it was a backwards way of saying how that it wasn't acceptable that I chose to get a nostril piercing.
It's just another form of control. It's a way to look down upon other people and feel like they are superior.
Passive aggressive.
She was on the more aggressive side than passive aggressive. Yeah, I know what you mean.
But covered over with like Christian niceties.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah. And oh dear. And praise the Lord.
Yeah. Speaking of which, do we want to get into those biblical passages that talk about body modifications?
I think we should get into what the Bible says because I mean, what else is driving people's opinions on this, right? Like in our culture, fundy ideas that are ostensibly Bible based is what gets all this started for people, right?
Right. Hmm.
And so then
Right.
they've taken what they thought was in the Bible and they've spun it culturally in their church groups all the different directions.
Tattoos and body modifications is no exception. And I'm actually surprised it doesn't come up more often, other than I've just known a lot of churches to kind of sneer at people with tattoos and crazy piercings. Apparently, just having your earlobe pierced is acceptable, but you go beyond that and they start getting a little, yeah.
Well, I remember being a part of like Chi Alpha, my my college Assemblies of God group. And
Nerd.
because it was a college group, you had people from a lot of different faith traditions or regions that had come together in that space. And so I remember being kind of shocked by someone who had a whole bunch of Christian-y tattoos on their arm. Like a big cross on their forearm and stuff about being a sinner on the back of their arm,
Mm.
like so like how does one group decide it's all entirely terrible to do that and another group decide, yeah, this is great. We'll just make our tattoos be about God and not about the devil and then it's fine, I guess. I don't, right?
I mean, I knew someone once that has that. They had that Leviticus passage talking about how you don't tattoo and modify your body at all.
God, that's awesome.
Leviticus 19:28. Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself. I am the Lord. Yeah, it's a sin to get a tattoo.
Okay, well, let's see. I
Okay, but
wonder.
it says don't cut your bodies. What does that mean for the dead? What the fuck does that mean?
I feel like that's one of those things that points to what a pagan ritual of the time would have involved.
I think you're right. I did
Yeah.
remember reading that. Like there were pagan traditions back then. And of course, Christians did not want to be associated with pagans, so they didn't do anything that was related to what the other people, the ones who aren't Christian, did. And so, I mean, by this passage, then even our mother had pierced ears. This clearly states, do not modify your body, don't cut up your body.
So, I mean, they are seemingly referencing an actual ritual of some kind or tradition of some kind, right? So, I obviously the Bible is just a little tool to like pull pieces out of to direct yourself and others in the way that you want them to go. But but I think that passage could easily be used to say, well, but that was only referring to this pagan tradition. And so that's not just referring to like, you know, other forms of body modification. But this is the mental gymnastics that happens when you want to do a thing and you need your book to agree with you, right?
Couldn't God come up with like 100th edition and update some of this shit?
It's true. Where is that? Well, but that he used men who knew better languages, right? And that's how
Fuck all the way off.
So yeah. Anyway, I guess given given the scripture like this, it's clear to see why the Worldwide Church of God that we grew up in was very anti-tattoo and body modification in general. In fact, I think it was a big deal when our ears got pierced because our mom's ears had not been pierced her whole life. And then it was like she waited for some change in the church to happen. I remember I was a kid. Um,
Really?
I think it was shortly after Armstrong died, like quite shortly after, um, that she got her ears pierced. And I thought that was just the coolest. Because I think before then it wasn't really looked favorably upon.
That's really strange. Mm.
I know, I could be wrong about that. So I'm kind of curious if there's any other WCG people out there that remember the like jewelry policies.
I remember her ears pierced, but I don't remember her wearing too much jewelry.
No, they
Mhm.
they were more ascetic, I think, than even the people we went to church with. Because we went to
Oh,
church
yeah.
in Silicon Valley in the 80s where, there were definitely women who were like business women and
Mhm.
working women and it was, they were it was feminism happening. Um,
Mm.
where women were still trying to be like men though and having big shoulder pads and all that stuff to assert their dominance. But but they wore tons of makeup and earrings, I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah.
yeah, it may honestly be, Nancy, that by the time we were a part of the church, the like strict control and the fact that Armstrong had died in 86 like may have made some of those things seem a lot more loosey-goosey um than maybe the church of the like 60s would have been.
Then there is another passage here. So we have 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. So that could be some kind of an argument. Changing your body is like insulting your creator, like this is God's handiwork. How dare you modify it? God made you perfect the way you are. Is that kind of what it's saying?
I mean, I think that's the interpretation, yes, but then how that squares with circumcision is kind of a mind fuck.
Eggs fucking exactly. Okay, what other body modifications does God actually say we should do? Which I don't think God actually says to circumcise in the Bible. That's something that Christians have warped, in my opinion. Though it
Well,
is
sure.
brought up in, God's chosen people to get them circumcised, but
Right. Well, and I mean, if you're talking about the body being a temple, if that's all it says, the body is a temple, like what did pe ancient people and even like some cultures today at the temple, what did they do? they adorn the fuck out of things. They lay flowers, they lay branches, like they decorate it, right? So to say the body is a temple and then to assume that means we're not supposed to touch it because it's good the way God made it, like I don't think that's how every culture would see that. You know what I'm saying? Like there are these cultures that would see the body being a temple as an invitation to decorate and beautify it.
Well,
Right?
there
So
you go. Temples in
it,
India where people bring shit and everything. But if we're going the temple route, you could say something like, yeah, people get on their knees before me and then they come inside me. You're
thank you, Nancy.
welcome.
But yeah, right? So like this is how everything's interpretation and you think, "Oh, the body is a temple and that just automatically means we don't tattoo it." Well, no it fucking doesn't. It means that because that's what you've heard your whole life and that comports with the society in which you grew up in. Like, come on now.
But people can't use that fucking apologetic and then do things like get their ear pierced. They can't.
Oh, but
That
they
goes against
do.
their
But they
argument.
do. But they do. Cognitive dissonance? Yeah. We are very good at separating things if we can get away with it, right? To make ourselves feel safe, to make ourselves have our needs met, even if it's not in a healthy way. Like, this
Yeah,
is us being very human,
I
as
know.
I say that in a robot voice somehow.
Alien voice cats, not a robot. We are all very human, thank you.
We would like to welcome you to planet Earth. We are totally from here.
We came to this planet looking for intelligent life. Oops, we made a mistake. Rest in peace, Robin Williams.
Oh, Nancy. That's great. Well, okay. So if we're gonna go the Bible route here, the thing that I think is funny, even though like right, the temple thing, I think I just laid out a pretty good case for why that could also mean decorate it the fuck up,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
But there are scriptures that people will point to feel like it justifies their body modification choices.
All right. So, yeah, passages that could support body modification. We have Isaiah 49:16. I have engraved you on the palms of my hand. So, is that some sort of like poetic metaphor for like, oh, this is like a divine tattoo? So, like, you're not actually tattooing yourself, but like Jesus is tattooing you, right? That sounds weird. It's kind of
I
like,
I mean, it sounds like scarification
well,
to get
right.
something engraved, to get something engraved on your body. Um, but
Okay.
right, right. I think it's possible that that could be used as a, you know.
It's possible, but I still think it's not giving the person the right to tattoo themselves according to the Bible. Is be like, no, Jesus is gonna do this. What's that phenomenon that some people say when some people have like a hole in their hands? Literally, there are people that say, oh, they
Yeah,
see the holes in both of their palms. What is that shit?
stigmata. It's getting the stigmata.
Stigmata. Okay.
Yeah. I think for a long time in the Catholic Church or Catholic Church lore, it was like a thing of like showing God's favor upon you or something that you would just like you would just show up with the stigmata where you would have the marks on your body that correlated to the wounds that Jesus got during the crucifixion.
So seriously, there are people that say they had holes in their hands and showed it. We're like, yeah, this is the mark of Jesus here. Maybe it's pertaining to this passage.
Right. And I think the stigmata was where it happened supernaturally to you. But people did it on purpose also, where they would scar
Hmm.
themselves. I know. I
See,
don't know if
that's
they
the
like
body
actually ran a nail
modification.
through it,
No,
but ugh. Yeah, I know. Right. I mean, well, think about the things that people do out of their devotion. Like people will flagellate themselves, like whip
no.
themselves, scar themselves, like think I'm gonna be good enough for God if I beat myself silly this way.
Well, I knew a man who attended some modern day Native American ritual where he was literally like put on like a cross and he was stabbed through both of his shoulders and he just had to hang there. Like, you did this willingly?
What?
He's like, yeah, it was very spiritual. Like, okay, well, that was your choice. You could do that if you wanted to, but all right, not for me. I don't know
Yeah.
what he meant by that. I don't know what he was supposed to get out of that, so yeah, this isn't just in Christianity. There's all kinds of body modifications that are like, I don't know, either required or is just part of their culture that they do. It symbolizes, it's more symbolizing things.
Right, right. It's people acting
Oh,
in a way that they feel shows their devotion, I suppose.
yeah.
Um, ugh.
So is that really consent anyway, or is that more coercion? There are some people that claim apparently they were happy to be sacrificed to the gods back in history too, but were they coerced? Does anyone really want to get stabbed through their heart and have their heart cut out and then thrown down a temple like the Mayans did?
That's a good question of where is that line of coercion versus choosing something for yourself? Because if your mind has been bent that direction by way of everything that's been told to you with
Mhm.
no insights into other ways it could be,
Yeah.
yeah, then at some level it's societal coercion. I don't know. I mean, this is a really, I think this is quite a conundrum, that line
Right. Hmm.
and the
Because
cult and culture line as well.
there is a cult out there that, my friend Monty talked about when we had our circumcision episode, where he said, "Oh, in this group, people just choose to have all of their sexual parts cut off so that there wouldn't be any sexual temptation. Like, are these people really wanting to do this? Did they consent, or were they kind of coerced into it, feeling like they had to in order to, I don't know, fit in or gain God's favor?" Does anyone really want all their body parts just completely chopped off? I'm not talking about trans people. I'm talking about people who have everything cut off because of sexual sin.
Right.
We need to get better at understanding what consent is. And are we really making these decisions for ourselves, or do we feel like there are outside factors causing us to do certain things? Or are we doing things in rebellion of that? Teenagers that go off and get tattoos without letting their parents know because they're rebelling against them. I don't know. There's a lot of different examples, and there's different ways of looking at it. That's why this topic is so hard. I've actually been tattooed kind of like shamed before. I've had people tell me, like, kind of get on my case about why I've never gotten a tattoo. Either they said, oh, I was a huge pussy or something like that. Oh, you're just scared. I'm like, no, if I wanted a tattoo, I would get one. It just like, and it wasn't like an insult to anybody. I wasn't trying to say, oh, I don't want to be that type of person. I've just never had any interest for the same reason I never had any interest in having children. I will pursue things that I want. I've just never wanted a tattoo.
Well, and there's
People have
the
shamed me into that.
maybe there's the difference though, Nancy, if we're talking consent coercion.
Hmm.
If a person is choosing something but does not know, realize, or feel empowered to choose anything else, I think we're in coercion,
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like it can
Mhm.
only be consent if that person knows fully that they can not choose that or that they have a myriad of other options, right?
Mhm. Yeah, right.
At least
Yep.
as I am seeing it, as I'm thinking through it right now.
We need to find a way to get better at ensuring people think for themselves. The problem is society doesn't want us to think for ourselves. I don't know. I've never really had too much of an issue standing up and making my own decisions and saying, if I don't want to do something, I'm not going to. If I do want to do something, I will pursue it, regardless of what people say to me. So I don't know. It's really weird to like have someone shame you for not having a tattoo, as if they were take kind of taking it personally. Sometimes people be like, "Oh, what? You think I'm some sort of trailer trash because I have a tattoo?" I'm like, "No, that's actually not what I'm saying at all." But it sounds like you have traumas that lie in that general region. So why don't we talk about that?
Yeah. Right? I mean, it's kind of like what we had said with the pressure to have children, right?
Hmm.
The idea of like misery loves company. It's like I had kids and, I'm dealing with it, so I kind of feel like you should too. And like I have a tattoo to show the world that it's okay and not trashy to have tattoos. Like, what do you think you are, all hoity-toity that you don't have a tattoo? Like, yeah, I mean, that's a gatekeeping of its own kind,
Yeah.
right? To
Oh,
try
I
to
love
get
tattoos
people
on
in the,
people.
well, yeah, right? But it's like a getting people in your club to validate your club.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, it's really weird that tattoos is a subject there, but okay, whatever.
I know,
It's no
right?
insult to anyone if I don't have tattoos. That was the choice for me. I never could think of anything that I would want permanently on my body the rest of my life. I didn't find it.
So I was in the same boat as you. I always wanted a tattoo. Like I thought they were really cool. I think they're lovely to look at. I think I don't even know. I'm losing my words. I've always liked tattoos. I always wanted one, and I just couldn't come up with something that I would say I know with absolute certainty I'm going to want this on my body forever and always, right? Like I didn't want to have tattoo of regret. So the one tattoo
Yeah.
I have done is a tattoo. It's on my rib cage over here, um, and it is on my rib cage to signify the area that I was kicked over and over from the inside by little tiny feet. So my tattoo is the names of my children and a leaf of each of the plants that they are named for in like a scripty thing on my side. So
Yep.
when it came to it, that was the only thing I knew for sure that no matter what life had in store for me, I would want my children's names there on me
Yeah.
forever.
That's good. It's a nice tattoo. Yeah.
So since you're bringing up the stigmata, I was noticing that we also had in our notes here Galatians 6:17, which
Mm.
states, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. That was where we did come into the awareness that early Christians, some of them did do this. They scarred themselves on purpose as a sign of their devotion to Jesus and what he did for them.
So it's weird. So we're discussing the same scriptures. Okay, so like this temple verse here, but then it's like both extremes can be justified, right? Depending on how you spin it. It's like
Well,
protecting God's
yeah.
creation versus adorning it as some act of reverence.
I mean, it's
Or-
a pretty good example of how the Bible is just kind of used that way to justify any fucking direction you want to control people.
Propaganda.
Right? It's like the perfect propaganda uh tome, I guess you could say.
You have coloring gray hair in here?
I just didn't know if you wanted to talk about that. It's not, it doesn't have to come up at all. It's fine if we're
Yeah.
talking
I suppose
tattoos
that's
and
not
everything.
really, I mean, it's kind of body modification, but kind of not. Like, we're really not like altering anything necessarily, are we?
Not permanent,
Not permanent, no. Though I
but
did get so many reactions from Karens when I started dyeing my hair. I don't even know how old I was, 15, 16 maybe, and I always went with like a nice auburn reddish color. It's still pretty natural, but like, yeah, just the snooty women looking at me. Like, you're too young to be dyeing your hair. Adults were such cunts to me. Like all of it, there were so many that just treated me like shit. I'm like, what kind of a person are you talking to, kids and teenagers that way? Like they're so vulnerable at those ages. Come on. Ugh.
right.
Terrible.
I'm very pro self-expression when it comes to hair because like hair grows, right? It comes back. It's fine. You know, I currently have children. One has entirely hot pink hair and the other has half of her hair teal. So, I mean, honestly, it's the most fun a person can have and express themselves, and it like changes nothing permanently about them.
Mm-hmm.
I see no downsides to really fun hair dye.
Well, right. What are the downsides other than, you get sneers and nasty comments from the stick in the ass people who be like, nope, nope, you don't dye your hair at all. You keep it a natural color. You don't adorn
Mm.
yourself with gold.
Okay. So that's a good question, though. If we're seeing the pink and teal hair that my kids have been free enough to do as as an expression of themselves and it's them actually taking their autonomy.
Mhm.
What about a woman that, grays early and she feels like, "Oh, I have to dye my hair to be acceptable because I'm too young to have this. I don't fit."
I think there's a lot of women that took that power back when there was this trend in recent years where they started dyeing their hair gray. I think a lot still are like gray as a popular, color to dye your hair, no matter what age you are. And it looked so great on so many women. I loved it. And we get stuck with like, oh, we get a few gray hairs and we got to cover it up. I have had men say nasty things to me before, like because they found a few gray hairs. I'm like, fuck all the way off. Yeah, it tends to happen when you reach 40
Well,
and
so
sometimes
is
earlier.
coloring our hair at that point, is that coercion or is that us choosing it for ourselves? Right?
I don't feel
Oh.
like I need to dye my hair and cover them up. I mean, I do sometimes, and my hair is lightened a little bit right now, but like, why are people judging other people for something that is so natural? Yeah, your hair will start graying, and men, they get the terms like a silver fox when they start getting the gray. I know my husband sometimes gets a little bit insecure about that too. I mean, he's not going to dye his hair, but both his parents do in India. Both their hair is completely black, and to be honest, I rarely see any elderly people in India that have like a full head of gray hair. I saw this like hippie Indian woman once. She had long, beautiful gray hair, but everyone else, like they just seem to dye it black. It's just what you do there for whatever reason. But yeah, I told him I don't mind it one bit. I think it's kind of sexy actually. He does got the silver fox thing going on. So I think we should normalize it with us women too. Yeah, we also get gray and we'll just fucking own it.
I mean, I
Not
don't
being
know
treated
if,
like old hags.
right, exactly. I mean, I think women, uh, see that's, this is where I feel like we should be bringing in a nod to our LGBTQ folks too. So I don't
Mm.
know if for you, Nancy, there was a moment where you had to recognize you were shifting from like, am I doing this because of what people will think? Or am I doing this because of what I want? Now, my intuition about you says you leaned hard to the what do I want all the time
Mhm.
anyway, and
Right. I
you
did.
weren't too affected by the what will people think. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I've been called everything under the sun, and I don't think it ever swayed me. You know, Men telling me I needed to get breast implants back when I was young and skinny, and oh, I gotta dye my hair because I'm getting a few grays in it. Whatever, fuck all the way off. I always did what I wanted and didn't do what I didn't want to do. Plain and simple. But that doesn't always come easy for people.
No, I was gonna say, I don't know how you got the gene that made you not like existentially afraid for your life and acceptance if you didn't match those things. Because I think
Because
that's
I
what,
stopped giving fucks a long time ago.
well, if you can help the rest of us learn how to stop giving fucks, that would be fan fucking tastic, Nancy.
There's a book out there, I haven't read it, but The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, that might be a good start. You were the indoctrinated one. I was the one that I had big thoughts and I just shut the fuck up and made myself small and I'm gonna get out of this and do what I want anyway.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm kind of surprised I don't have more piercings and tattoos also. But I think I also like absorbed some cultural ideas of classiness, even though I think it's bullshit. I
Yeah.
think, I was sort of taught to be like, ooh, about the idea of like a whole part of me being covered in tattoos. And so and the whole thing of me like fearing regret of my image choices. So,
Mm. Maybe I had a little bit of that too. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to get something that I'm just going to look at and it's going to annoy my OCD and be like, there's something on my skin that I just feel doesn't belong there. And like, maybe that's the biggest part. But I love tattoos. Like, I love meeting up with people who have like whole sleeves. I'm like, oh, tell me about your tattoos because that's a great conversation starter. They always seem to have some kind of story behind each tattoo and why they got it. And oh, maybe they designed it themselves or they talk about where they got it and what it means. I love that. It's art.
Absolutely. It is art and self-expression and expression of autonomy and
Hmm.
like who they are. I know I have always felt like everyone has a story, right? Even a person that you're like, really, you must have had the most boring life. Like, I don't think there's anything interesting about you. Like, I would never actually think that. But
Yeah,
you
you do.
know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. If you think like they just don't appear to have anything like lively or anything like full of life going on about them
Right,
and make prejudgments, if you sit down and you give a shit about them and you actually get to know them, every person has the most interesting story and
right.
there's fascinating things about all of them. And just the humaniness is so cool and so beautiful and it's all so hard also.
Hmm.
Like we gotta have some compassion for each other, and when we do, I think we find compassion for ourselves and who each of us are seeking to be.
And we should work towards feeling like we can express ourselves in whatever artistic way we view, as long as the decision is ours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's how many earrings we have lined up our ear or what rock star face we have tattooed on our back. I mean, I would even like I would fight for people's right to do things like what is it? I don't know what he goes by, but there's a guy who's turned himself, at least one, into a lizard basically,
Oh
right?
yeah. Hmm.
Like split his tongue and interestingly the sides of the tongue can operate independently of each other when you do that. Like there's a mind fuck for you of what the body can do, but he's got like plates and in his face to be like, scales and, bony protrusions like lizards have and has tattoos to be scales and all kinds of things. And it's like, dude, I don't know what got you to the point where that is what you needed. And sure, it's gawk worthy and everything, but like, if it really makes you feel good about you and you really needed that and you're happy with it, like, what am I
Right.
gonna say?
We may not permanently alter our bodies all the time, but we temporarily change our looks through things like putting on makeup, dyeing our hair, even just doing your hair a different way. Mine's up right now instead of down. I probably look different than normal. Little things, changing our
Well,
clothes, changing our weight if we get put on weight, if we lose weight, get more muscle, whatever.
right. But isn't it funny how we've decided societally that some things make us look at people differently, you
Right.
know? Even the weight thing makes us look at people differently. We think different things about their motivation in life based on their size and shit like that, you know? Like those things
Oh,
get baked in.
people absolutely fat shame out there. Yes. Like there are some people that are not taken seriously, like saying, "Oh, I don't want to go to this doctor because they're overweight." So obviously, I'm not going to take advice from an overweight doctor and just completely shaming them. Like, we don't know people's situations, you know?
I mean, but we would sh fat shame the people who are larger and then still be fat shaming them when they had to get a stomach stapling surgery or get their extra skin removed when they lost weight. Like there's a judgment there too. Right.
Or
And maybe
scar
that's
shaming.
scar
Yeah.
shaming. Yeah, interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
right? Like we kind of have a revulsion of someone who's had something happen to them. But it's interesting then that we have that revulsion also when someone did the scars to themselves on purpose.
Right.
So yeah, it's fascinating how we all bounce off of each other and impact each other.
Yeah, we have a friend who branded himself, which it was his decision. I mean, I don't think he's necessarily going to regret it down the road. It's kind of part of his story now. So,
It is part of his story, and if I am not mistaken, when he chose to do that, he was very clear about which Bible scripture he had decided gave him not only the go ahead, but almost the imperative for him to do that.
right.
So like these are the things that people will decide for themselves, which let's be clear, some are deciding it for themselves based on what they've decided a particular book means.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so to me, that's a very interesting question of consent or coercion. If you had your brain broken to convince you that this Bible was like somehow true in the Word of God, when none of that is justifiable, and it makes you do things that cause harm to you that you might not have done otherwise.
Hmm.
Like we've got a situation here with a
Yeah.
little book we like to call the Bible. And that to me is evidence of the Bible causing harm.
Yeah, what else is new, right? But I do
Mm-hmm.
want to applaud all the people that have these sort of like body modifications, and they did it despite knowing that society was probably going to be looking down on them. Something as simple as a friend of ours who goes out in public wearing a kilt. Sometimes people say things about people going out in public wearing a kilt, which is weird because I think it's fucking awesome. But yeah, there are still people that judge. You wouldn't believe just the weird stuff people judge other people for. Holy shit. I mean, like, do you
Mm-hmm.
not have a life? You don't have anything better to do than look at what someone else has and sneer at it? Like for their self-expression that isn't hurting a damn person?
I completely agree with you. And this might be a good moment to bring up our transgender friends,
Yeah.
right? Because this is a place of not only are we talking about consent of an adult
Hmm.
for body modifications, potentially, whether it's hormonal or, physical changes, um, we're also adding into that conversation the fact that we understand that for people experiencing gender dysphoria, to have treatments that involve body modification are the treatments. It's interesting to me that when we even have it proven that this is helpful, we still have to have consent from those people for that treatment to occur for them.
Right.
And so they get to choose it for themselves. And it's great that we have the knowledge now and the evidence to show that it's helpful. And so we've got many layers of when there's bigotry toward the transgender community and, people are flying off the handle about, oh, kids changing their bodies. Like, no, no, no. No one is changing kids' bodies.
Hmm.
Settle your shit. What we're talking about is adults in conversations with medical care providers, and they are receiving the very best treatment for themselves to feel good in the world.
And to feel
And
right in the world, yeah.
exactly, and I think it's our job as cis allies to say that whenever we have an occasion to say it.
All comes down to consent.
It really does. It really does come down to consent and like data, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in the conversation around bodily autonomy for transgender people, like the reason we have the treatments available that we have now is because of data, because some dedicated scientists cared enough to work with people who were experiencing gender dysphoria to figure out what would be a helpful treatment. So I put out a request on our WCG Survivor Discord to see if anyone had personal stories that they wanted to share about body modification, tattoo kind of stuff from their time in the church. One of the
Yeah.
stories I got back was from our friend JJ, who helps out here on the channel. So JJ writes, after leaving WCG in the mid 90s, and at 16, I got a girlfriend in high school. I started to go out Friday nights and feeling so much freedom, but still having moments of thinking I was doing something wrong. After graduation, I decided that I really wanted a tattoo. but I wanted to create it. I was doodling one day and came up with a cartoon smashed mosquito for behind my shoulder. I knew it was a safer place to hide it from my mom at the time, or at least that's what was in my head when I planned it out. This was summertime, mind you, and after getting the work done, my family was going away for a weekend camping trip to the lake. Well, the secret didn't last more than a couple of hours after meeting them there. I was just too excited to not share around the campfire, and my mother was so mortified. A few years later, we talked about this event. She said that it really bothered her at the time because I marked up my body. I know she didn't say I sinned, but I just knew she was still stuck in that mindset from the years of WCG programming dating back to the early 60s. Over time, I stopped giving a shit and I got my navel pierced at 20 years old and my ears gauged a couple years later. More tattoos would follow throughout my 20s, but that first one, I knew since my mom was still attending church at the time that it was going to be a sour reaction, but I just wanted to have some individuality and do what I wanted for the first time in my life.
Yay, JJ.
Yeah, right? I know. I love that.
Yeah, they do have all kinds of tattoos and piercings, don't they?
To them, it felt like doing something that I wanted to do for myself and getting to be free. So, the other story I have is from a woman also on our WCG Survivor Discord. And she says, of course, my parents were totally against me getting any kind of tattoos or piercings other than one piercing on each earlobe, and even that was pushing it. So, in 2005, when I was 29, I decided to get a tattoo in honor of the 10th anniversary of my baptism. Different story for a different day, lol. I was still a pretty conservative, though slightly rebellious, evangelical Christian then, so I decided to get it in the middle of my back so that it would usually be covered up and really only be visible if I really wanted it to be. I did tell my parents that I was getting one. I think I got a kick out of freaking them out. Totally understand that vibe. And of course, they threw a bit of a fit. They knew they couldn't do anything about it since I was a grown ass adult with a husband and two children who lived 19 hours away.
Hmm.
When I saw them a couple months later at Thanksgiving, my mom asked to see it. So I showed it to her. And of course, she says, well, why did you get it there? If you were going to do it anyway, why didn't you get it somewhere you could see it? I just looked at her and said, Mom, you have got to make up your mind. I didn't get another tattoo until 2020 when I got the first two lines of the Litany Against Fear from Dune on the inside of my wrist, and then in 2021 when I got a symbol from the Wheel of Time on my forearm. My parents freaked out again and asked why I got them where they're visible. Smack my head.
Wow. Oh.
Last summer, I got a few weird ear piercings, and my dad just did that face where he presses his lips together and pulls his chin in like he's disappointed. But I think my mom actually thinks they're cool. LOL.
That's funny because what her dad does, our mother does, pursing the lips. It's that look of disappointment, the whole like I'm not mad at you, I'm
Mm.
just disappointed, which usually hurts worse. Like, oh, okay. You're disappointed.
Yep.
Well, meanwhile, in our adult lives, we're over here like, I disappointed you again? Outstanding. I didn't conform again, is what I didn't conform again. That's what it means.
Oh, did I make you sad again that I was breaking your God's laws? Oh, I'm sorry.
I wish I had some stories, but no, I guess I'm pretty boring as far as like bodily self-expression. Like I said, I didn't even get my ears pierced till I was like in my 30s. Like I just never thought about stuff like that. I was thinking about other things, but I appreciate all the people that, do self-express through their artistic works. I see some women with uh, every color of the rainbow hair, and it looks great. I think it's super fun to see what people come up with.
Let's see, what did I mention? I mentioned my tattoo on my side and that I had my nose pierced. I've had my ears pierced since I was like 7, I think. So somehow the church let us do that by then, by the time I was
Okay.
7. So that was post Armstrong dying. Yeah. But then at age 13, I didn't tell this story. At age 13, I wanted a double pierced ear
Mhm.
so bad that I was like, I'm just gonna fucking do it. And so I went in the bathroom with a bag of frozen vegetables
Uh,
and my like my old like the little stud earring that I got that got punched through my lobes for the first hole. I had one of those because it had kind of a pointy back on it, and I sanitized it, held the frozen bag of vegetables to my ear for a while, and then I just shoved that fucker through my earlobe, Nancy. Like just held my earlobe and just pushed it through. I could hear it going through the flesh. I don't
ah!
know how I did that. Yeah, but like, right? Like to me, this shows like the drive for self-expression through body modification is rather strong, right?
That's
The
interesting that
only
you had that drive. I did not.
I know, right? The only other thing I did was I got my helix pierced, and now I don't have anything in there. But I had like a hoop in the top of my ear there in the cartilage.
That I
I think
remember
I
cartilage. I definitely could not do like this just the thought of it going through cartilage. I'm like, nope, nope. I'd be like, no.
the piercing itself wasn't a problem, but later I tried to get it stretched, and that didn't feel great.
There's some, I don't know if it's a ritual tradition over there in northern India where some dudes were like, take this really long needle and put it straight through their cheek. There's one guy apparently like does it like several times a day for whatever reason. Like he just does it like, oh, yeah, whatever. And I saw it on an episode of Wild Boys once because Steve-O did the same thing.
Oh.
I was like cringing watching. I'm like, no.
I mean, these are maybe the reasons that body modification is like such good fodder for television shows. Like it makes people freak out for the people that are willing to poke and prod and color and all of the things.
Well, and speaking of which, like I am all for people modifying their body however they want to. It doesn't affect anyone else. But yes, I got to admit, I cringe at some of them. Like there's certain they may come off as radical, and again, we're talking about is coercion something involved in this, where I think it's China, where women have their feet bound, like feet binding, I believe it's called,
Is
where it
that
makes their
still
feet
done though?
long.
I don't think
I
that's
don't
still
know if
done.
it's still done.
Okay, we're gonna look this up.
Let's
I
look it up.
don't think foot binding still happens.
Or the neck stretching in Africa. But we'll get there. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking it up, and foot binding was officially banned in China in 1911, but they're saying the practice was continued in some areas until the 1990s.
Okay, and then I think they did that just to make what women should have been seen as like dainty or having smaller feet was considered more attractive.
Right. So, okay, so what it was though. So when a girl was 5 or 6 years old, and I don't think this was for all women, it was like, yeah. So when a girl was 5 or 6 years old,
Mhm.
her foot would be tightly wrapped with cloth. Um, and they're saying it was originally done, ooh, by entertainers and concubines for beautification. So that's yucky to recognize that women or girls were being marked for being concubines, apparently, by the age of 5. And then it says it later became a status symbol and a custom necessary for marriage. So, okay, well, this says foot binding was outlawed in 1912 after the Taiping Rebellion and again after the communist takeover in 1949. So the last factory to make shoes for women with bound feet stopped production in 1998. Wow. Yeah, I mean,
98.
yeah, it made it difficult to walk. Like, obviously, it just was not healthy because skeletons like to move, you know?
Mm.
I know. I
See,
know.
that's coercion. No, no.
Well, yeah, right? It's lifelong disability, really. But
Well,
if
this
the girls being that was being done to were originally slated to be concubines, I guess they didn't figure they needed to be on their feet very much.
gross.
And they for sure didn't need to run fast. Yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
There's
so
there's
outside of that, which, again, this is like, how far do we wade into this of like, do we call that not okay? Like bodily autonomy wise, I would say that's not okay. How do
Mhm.
you call out other cultures that aren't our own? I mean, right?
True.
These are dicey topics to bring up, but I think to me it's reasonable to say for girls in that situation having that done to their bodies, that was a violation of their bodily autonomy.
Right? The same could be said about tribes in Africa where kids have their skulls warped into looking like aliens or their necks stretched out to the point where it's like several feet tall. You know which ones I'm talking about? All the
Is that
rings
still done
around.
though? Well, I think the
Yeah,
rings
it
in the
is.
head is
It
different.
is. Hmm?
The rings and the head shaping are different, though.
Yeah, I know that. I know that.
I mean, the alien thing is sort of your interpretation of what they were doing.
Their heads
That
look like aliens, Pats. That's
uh,
I'm not wrong.
are
It's
look like aliens. We've never seen aliens. We don't know what aliens look like.
I mean, Patty, you know I'm talking about the typical gray alien visage.
Well, yeah, but that's made up. What if that was made up after we found the skulls of these, children around the world whose heads were molded?
It could be, but dragons don't exist either, yet we know what dragons look like because everyone draws them in a similar way.
Well, so if you're going to talk about, like Nancy, you were bringing up when we were getting ready for this, you were bringing up like tribal practices on the continent of Africa. We're both aware of, in the past at least, tribes where people's necks were stretched from an early
Hmm.
age with coils as a sign of beauty.
Hmm.
But it seems like things like that have largely gone away also, and even places where those traditions are somewhat carried on, it sounds like the younger generation is deciding they don't want to do it because they want to go and pursue other interests. So, I mean, in some ways, could we take that as sort of a way of how this might go, right? To recognize that as our societies all learn more about each other and our whole world, learns more about humaniness, that maybe we'll start to back away from some of those things that happened in more isolated pockets of the planet.
Yeah, it's interesting how beauty standards ties into this.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Like culturally, societally, all the beauty standards across cultures, across the world.
Right. I find it interesting to notice that both the foot binding in China and um, a lot of the like the neck coil kind of body modifications on the continent of Africa, kind of seems like that was done primarily to women.
Hmm.
In all kinds of indigenous groups, we'll see that there was a lot of modifications or, I don't know, decorations added to penises as well, or like things being tucked and pushed and modified also. So, I mean, we've been doing these things to ourselves.
I'm sorry, decorations to penises? That sounds funny. Why don't you hang some garland from them? I mean, I did see a picture once of a dick that had piercings going all the way from the shaft to the tip. Woo!
Well,
Ouch.
and we were a big fan of cod pieces for a while, even if it wasn't directly attached to it. We like made much of that area.
I I think is it Ripley's Believe It or Not, the museum that sometimes has like at least pictures or some sort of statues of some of those people out there that have gotten like crazy body modifications done.
And so if we're talking coercion, I think that indicates a hierarchical situation, right?
Hmm.
And so it's a status thing at that point. If
Right.
you're involved in a group that like, you had mentioned at one point how some groups had these like boards that they would clamp onto babies' heads to
Hmm.
shape how the skull would be a little bit elongated, because that was their beauty standard, but it also indicated a status, right? Like they were an elevated position, and that was indicated by the fact that their head was made into this shape that, that was a child put through that process.
Right. Hmm.
And so these things have that attached to it, like that it tells other people that you're better than them if you have these adornments or your body's changed in this way, right? So
Right.
it's
Well,
status. Yep. So it's status, but it's also just belonging to that group, right? Like some
mhm.
are the special modifications that say you're the king, that say you're the leader, but other modifications are like, oh, this actually just says you belong. Like circumcision and Jewish people. Like that for a long time was a symbol of you are one of us.
Yeah.
And if you're one of a group, that means you're more likely to eat, and we're back at lizard brain,
Yes.
Right? Because if you're not part of a group, if you're an outsider, you're gonna die outside of the walls of the community.
Yeah.
Like you're exposed to the elements, you're exposed to the wild animals.
Right. And in a way, I mean, yeah, body modification shows individualism, and a lot of people frown upon individualism. And so these people were othered. I remember in high school, the popular girls would be the most minimal possible, wearing their pearls or whatever, their nice designer clothes. You just kind of everything plain in a way. And then you have these girls over here with the crazy bright non-natural hair color and tattoos and piercings all over the place, crazy jewelry, and yeah, all of a sudden that becomes like, no, you're not one of the group now. You look different, and so we're gonna look down upon you.
But I think that's intentional, right? Like if the get inside the box of everyone does this and looks this way makes you part of the group, if you're in resistance to that, if you're rebelling against that
Yeah,
box that you find cloistering, like you're using like you just said, body modification is then also a way to say, I am not part of your group.
some people get all the tattoos and piercings, especially in teen years, as a big like fuck you, mom and dad.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or some just some people, I think. Maybe it gotten to the point where they were just so desperate to be noticed that they felt like they had to change their looks too in order to, I don't know, shock value perhaps. And that's not to downsize anyone with their personal expression of body modification. It's just, I think some people felt like they had to be seen, so they had to go bold.
But isn't that still some self-expression?
It is,
Right? They're
absolutely.
expressing that because they want to and they want to be seen, but it's also expressing, I was lacking this,
Hmm.
right? I was lacking being seen. I was lacking having people point out things about me that stood out from the crowd, right?
Right. Mhm.
Because that is important for us as humans to be recognized as special and unique and cared about for who you are and an individual, right? Like we all crave that on some
Right.
like deep level.
It's almost poetic in a way, giving yourself a physical scar based on possibly an emotional scar in your life.
Holy shit, Nancy. Well, yeah. So if we're talking about body modification as a way to set ourselves apart and like show that we're independent and we can make choices for ourselves, I think we can use our body modification, our tattoos, and piercings as a way to heal, right? Whether it's directly like a fuck you, you told me I couldn't do this, so look, I'm going to do it. Or even if you didn't have that idea that you shouldn't do a tattoo, like people will really spend a lot of time designing a tattoo that speaks to the things they've gone through that they want represented on their body, you
Mhm.
know? So it definitely serves or can serve a purpose of reclaiming yourself, reclaiming your autonomy and what it is you want to say about yourself. Well, so Nancy, the thing about this conversation that we've been having about body modification as it relates to bodily autonomy is it did kind of open up some, cans of proverbial worms as we were talking through this.
Yeah, sure did.
I mean, we didn't actually mention abortion, but like, let's be honest, that is absolutely a part of this.
I
Because
like
the
this.
act of becoming a mother, the act of allowing your body to be used for the growth of another human, that modifies your body.
Yep.
That makes a lifelong change to the shape and functionality of parts of the body. Like,
Yep.
that's a choice that also requires consent. And we referenced earlier our transgender friends and really the concept of, bodily autonomy and body modification. To me, that suggests that if in some types of body modification, we think that we have the right to police each other's bodies and tell other people how they need to have their body be. I mean, that sets us up to not grant autonomy to all people, right? So people who are transgender, like that is their body, and the choices they make around their treatment is their choice to make. It is not ours to legislate.
Right.
And we have medical doctors involved and piles of research and to let our cultural biases dictate someone's medical care or someone's um, consenting informed choices, to me, that's what's wrong of us, is to police that and take away anyone's autonomy to do what they need to do that's right for them.
Mhm. Mm.
And admittedly, probably the realm of body modification that makes me have a little more of a negative reaction is talking about cosmetic surgeries. People who want a nose job or whatever. Like, because to me, I would love it if everyone just felt great in their bodies and happy with themselves and knowing that they're good enough as they are. Like that, I have a strong desire for that. But at the same time, I can't tell someone they're wrong, that they're gonna feel better if they have that, the saggy mommy belly tightened up. Like, you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not gonna tell them they're wrong. I've had friends that did that, and it made them feel so much better.
Yeah. I had a friend who, like, she had 4 kids. And so she got breast implants, not like a ridiculously huge size. It just that she said her breasts like shriveled up like little grapes. Like she just didn't feel good about herself after that. So I was all for it. I'm just like, yeah, you do your thing. People shouldn't be judging you for that, you know?
Well, right, and that's gender affirming care just like transgender people would receive. And I'd like to say that the hair plugs that Elon Musk got put in is also gender affirming care.
Oh, Patty, you went there.
Sorry. I,
Yeah, Elon's hair transplant.
but right,
Yes,
like
that's body modification. Yes, hair
it's body
transplant.
modification. And should he have had the right to do that? Yeah, of course.
Yes.
But maybe take into account the fact that he had the right to do that and then thinks that he wants to tell other people what they can and can't do with their body. Like, fuck all the way off. That's not how any of this ought to work.
People pick and choose.
What it comes down to is autonomy in this realm is not about whether you change anything about yourself, whether you modify or not. It's about the fact that you had the right to decide that for yourself and that you hopefully can choose that without repercussions and judgment.
I don't know if we'll ever have a society where people don't judge. I mean, judging is definitely what people do, but it's one of those things like people shouldn't be collectively ganging up on maybe a particular type of body modification and saying, "Oh, this is less attractive," or people shouldn't be doing this, only unclassy people do this, whatever the fuck the reason is. Because society does that far too much.
But why? Why do we have this tendency to want to control others' ways of being in the world?
Hierarchy, patriarchy.
Why? What is it about us that makes us feel like we need to make things hierarchical? Because I would contend it's not serving us and that we can actually exist in non-hierarchical ways. So why are we operating that way?
Well, and again, there's a lot of men at the top that want all women to look a certain way. And so they try to police that. So all they have are, I don't know, their typical standard of beauty in women.
Well, so it's maintaining their power, right?
Well, right. Yeah.
Why do humans feel the need to have power over each other? That
Yeah.
this is the part that I just feel gross about and I need to understand. And the only thing I can come to is that our desire to have power over each other is our trauma response to not having had enough
Right.
or the fear of not having enough. Like like why would humans initially have done anything to harm each other?
But in
Well,
a
I don't
religious
have
setting,
anything and you have something that I want, so I'll kill you to get it.
oh gosh. But in a religious setting, I just don't understand. Like using the Bible as a way to police people's looks and their bodies.
Well, but if you control a person's body, just like we said this with food too, if you control what they're putting in their bodies, but if you control how they present themselves, I mean, you own them.
One thing we didn't really cover much yet was the shame aspect. I feel like a lot of people put shame on others for the way they look. I know the church does that especially.
To me, I see that as a function of our whole society, right? When we get like the the well-known understanding of photoshopped models in magazines and how bad that's been for young girls trying to figure out what it means to grow into themselves as a woman, you know? And just how like if you look at what our beauty standards are there, which I mean, let's just go for it because beauty standards is like straight up linked with all of this. Um, if you look at our beauty standards, how many of them that are put on women are about making us look like little girls
Oof.
and also making us look sexually aroused?
On the men's side, we can't speak from a man's perspective necessarily, but I know they probably feel a lot of shame as far as um, not being fit enough or confident enough or suave enough.
The masculinity that we put forth also, I would say, is fairly toxic. And like, not all men are that kind of, rugged, I'm a big dude in charge kind of man.
The typical what alpha male look. Yeah.
And then men go around thinking they're not good enough as men because they're not strutting around like an alpha male. Like, ick. That is
Yeah.
the least kind of men we need in this world. Like, come on now.
So whether you're rocking a tattoo sleeve, still thinking about that nose ring, or just trying to figure out why you care what Aunt Karen thinks about your purple hair, remember, your body is your own. And if someone's got a problem with that, well, they can take it up with their own temple.
Well, Nancy and I would like to thank you very much for hanging with us for this episode of the Apostate Sisters. We're considering this the end of our series on bodily autonomy for now, but you know us. You know we'll be back with more topics about bodily autonomy, because bodily autonomy is connected to everything. If you like what Nancy and I are doing here, head on over to Patreon and become one of our sinful siblings to support the show. And follow us on our social media to see everything that the Apostate Sisters are up to. We can be found on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Blue Sky. Thank you for being here with us, and we will see you next time.
Like and subscribe! Yay! Bye!